Hey everybody, Ramey here. And today what we're going to do is I'm going to tell you how to structure an online course, like any kind of online lesson, any kind of online video, any kind of e-learning. And it doesn't matter if you're doing this live real time, like a Zoom session, or you're doing this asynchronously where like you're just sending your students a bunch, like a lesson, like materials. I'm going to tell you how you actually go about structuring that. Like, what should your components be? So like, let's say we'll just for the example of this, we'll just say I'm doing a Zoom session and I want to know, how do I organize this? How do I structure this so that my students learn? All right, so what I'm going to talk about is an organizational strategy, and then I'm going to talk about some delivery strategies you use within that. So I'm an instructional designer. That means I design instruction. This is what I do professionally. So there are a bunch of different theories out there that tell you how you should organize instruction. What I have done, and I'm actually writing a book on this that should have been out pretty soon, but because of this virus, probably got held back a little bit. I've compiled them and basically taken all the components of all different organizational strategies and put them into one very easy to use format. So let's talk about it. Okay, so the first thing you're going to do, the first part is the introduction. All right, so during the introduction, you're going to do things. You want to gain the learner's attention. So somehow capture your audience's attention. Like, who are your learners? How are you going to capture their attention? Are you going to give them some kind of story? Are you going to have them play some kind of like game? Somehow you got to get their motivation. Think motivation, capture attention. Like, what are you going to do? Now, this depends on your topic and all of that stuff and who your learners are, but you want to grab their attention to start. Okay, next thing. We're going to tell them what they're going to learn. Today's lesson, we're going to learn about what are your goals and objectives? What are you teaching them? Are you teaching them about the planets? Are you going to teach them about multiplication? Are you teaching them about like some kind of sophisticated equation? What are you teaching them? Tell them what you're teaching them about so they know what they should be learning. Okay, then this doesn't matter if they're little kids or 50-year-old adults. You got to tell them what they're going to learn. Today we're going to talk about tell them. All right, so this is all part of the introduction. We've got gain their attention, tell them what they're going to learn. Next thing, we talk about, and this may or may not apply. So when you're going through all these, remember, if you're like, well, this doesn't apply to my lesson, okay, then you probably don't include it. But next thing, we're going to stimulate recall of prior learning. Okay, so, hey, last week we covered XYZ. Remember when we talked about that? Maybe I even show them a little bit about it to help them recall, depending on the topic. We just review it really quickly, and so that they're familiar. You're bringing it back. You're bringing it back. Sometimes I teach like a class. Like, I hate when I teach a class and it's only one time a week, because at the beginning of every class, my students just totally forget what they learned last week. I have to bring it back, put it back in their memory, jog their memory, get their attention again. When I have class like every day or 3 times a week with the students, oh man, it's so much easier because they're already right there, right there, right there. So you got to get their memory back, get them to remember again. All right, that's part 1, introduction. We gain their attention, we describe what they've learned, and we talk about what we've learned previously. All right, that's part 1. All right, so the second part that I want to talk about today is the part where you present your content. I call this part content, presentation, and learning. Part 2, content, presentation, and learning. This is where I present my material to my students. So depending on my topic, my students, all that stuff, I've got to figure out what's the best way to present this content to them. Am I going to give them problems? Is this problem-based learning? Am I using like a PowerPoint presentation? Am I give them like a case study to solve, and then they're going to come back? Am I going to divide them up in groups? Am I going to give them some worked examples? Like if I was doing math, am I going to use like a game and do some game-based learning? What exercise are we going to do to learn, to present the content, have the content reinforced? Because I have to make sure that I'm presenting the content, I'm reinforcing the learning, and I'm providing feedback to them during this so that they know they're learning and they know what they're supposed to be learning. So I've got to make sure that I do that stuff. But there are many, many ways to do this. Am I using some kind of like, I can use any kind of game. I can use a case. I can use problem-based learning. I can, whatever it is, that I want to do. Flashcards, however I want my students to learn, this is where I present it to them. So this is my content. So we have our introduction. That was step 1. our introduction. That's where we introduced our content. Part 2 is the content presentation. This is where I'm presenting, but we're not done yet. You know, a lot of times we go into this and we just present the content and that's it. No, there was step 1 where we made sure our learners knew what was going to happen and we got them motivated. Step 2, that's where we present our content. Now we have step 3. Step 3, how are we assessing? How are we assessing this? I don't mean that we have to give them a test right now, but I want to make sure that they have some kind of informative assessment, you know, so that they know what they need to work on and I know what needs to be reinforced further. But there has to be some kind of assessment. And that might be a project, that might be homework, that might be an activity, that might be a post-test. Whatever it is, I need to make sure that A, my students have learned this material that they know, and I need some kind of evidence of that, and I need to reinforce them knowing it. And that goes into step 4, which is my final step, which is actual utilization, where I'm seeing, did this transfer? What part of, so, you know, we have like 2 kinds of knowledge. We have low level knowledge, which is like facts, recall, you know, like regurgitating information. But then we have higher level knowledge, which is, you know, could be somehow using that for some kind of new case, like transfer, problem solving. How am I getting them to actually use this in some way? You know, if it was an elementary school student, it could be like having them use the word in a new sentence. But like whatever it is, if it's more advanced, I could having them like solve some kind of like world problem. Whatever it is I want to do, how am I having them, showing them how this information is going to be used for the next thing? How are we transferring this knowledge? Okay. There were 4 steps. So whatever you're doing your Zoom, you're doing whatever you're doing. Introduction, that's where we gain their attention. We tell them their objectives. Then step 2, content presentation. We present our material, we provide guidance, we help them through that. Step 3, assessment. What is it? Homework, a post-test. How are we going to assess this? Step 4, make sure we guide our learner so that they, A, have learned this. We want retention. And it's now being transferred to something else, whatever that is, to their schoolwork, to a book they're reading, to their career, if they're, you know, like Votech or high school or college or higher ed, like beyond college, like, you know, master's, doctorate. How are they transferring this? And that can be done through things like memory aids, whatever, however we want to transfer it. Maybe it's through some kind of activity, but we have to make sure that happens. So those are the steps. That's how you design a lesson. Always think of the 4 components and ask yourself, how am I doing this? That doesn't mean that these have to be done in like a particular order. You know, sometimes I'm doing assessment and transfer. That's the same thing. It's like a great big project that they're doing. And in that project, they're going to see the transfer. They're going to see that marriage right there, how that works. You know, and sometimes maybe that happens even during my content. Like there's assessment within my content and there's lots of informative assessment and that's happening right there. And it's all about making sure I'm hitting all of the correct steps. And maybe that motivation that started in part 1 continues through the whole entire thing to keep them motivated and fun and excited. So it all depends how you're going to structure this. But this can be done for Zoom, any online course. You can do this, and this should be done when you're planning out lesson plans or anything, any kind of learning that's happening. Thank you very much.